The airport was loud, bright, and full of rushing footsteps, but Margaret felt only the strange silence growing inside her chest. She sat on a metal chair near the glass wall, clutching her little suitcase so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every few seconds, she lifted her head, searching the crowd for Daniel and Olivia. Every few seconds, her heart jumped. Every few seconds, it fell again. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice thin and trembling. "Olivia?" No answer. The departure board blinked above her. People laughed, rolled their bags, hugged their families, and hurried toward gates she could not read. Margaret kept staring at the doorway where her son had disappeared with his wife nearly an hour ago. He had kissed her forehead and said, "Wait here, Mama. We'll be right back." Ha ha, don't worry. She had smiled through tears because she believed him. She believed him because he was her son, and because mothers always believe. Welcome to Prime Stories. Margaret had lived most of her life with tired hands and a hopeful heart. After her husband died when Daniel was only 9, she became mother and father both. She scrubbed floors in the morning, stitched clothes in the afternoon, and washed dishes late into the night until her fingers cracked and bled. She never complained. If Daniel needed shoes, she went barefoot for a month. If he needed books, she sold her wedding bangles. If he wanted a better school, she took extra shifts until her back ached so badly she could barely stand. Someday, she would whisper while tucking him into bed, "You'll have a life softer than mine." And Daniel, with his small arms around her neck, would say, "I'll take care of you when I grow up, Mama. I promise." Those words kept her alive through the hardest years. When Daniel grew into a handsome young man with a good job and a bright future, Margaret cried with pride at his graduation. She sat in the front row in her best faded sari, clapping until her palms stung. She thought every sacrifice had finally bloomed into something beautiful. Then Daniel met Olivia. Olivia was graceful, polished, and always smiling with perfect teeth. At first, Margaret welcomed her warmly. "You're my daughter now," she said, pressing sweets into Olivia's hands. "This house is yours too." Olivia smiled sweetly. "Ah, thank you, Mom." But there was always something cold behind her eyes, something Margaret could not name. Olivia never raised her voice, never argued openly, but she had a way of making Margaret feel small. She would sigh when Margaret spoke too long, or glance at Daniel whenever Margaret entered the room, as if she were an inconvenience that had wandered in by mistake. Still, Margaret told herself to be patient. Love needed time. Families needed patience. Then one morning, Daniel burst into her room with a grin so wide it made his face glow. "Mom, pack your bags." Haha, you're not going to believe this. "We're taking you to America with us." Margaret froze, one hand still holding her shawl. "America?" "Yes!" Daniel laughed, almost bouncing on his feet. "You'll live with us. No more lonely nights. No more struggling. You'll finally be with your son." Her eyes filled instantly. She covered her mouth, trembling so hard she had to sit down. "Really? After all these years?" Olivia stepped into the doorway, smiling that careful smile. "Of course, Mom. We've arranged everything." Margaret looked from one face to the other, unable to stop the tears. She hugged Daniel first, then Olivia, holding them both as if she were afraid the dream might vanish if she loosened her grip. That night, she packed her old suitcase with shaking hands, folding her few clothes as though they were precious treasures. She touched each item and whispered thank you to God. She did not know that the brightest smiles sometimes hide the darkest intentions, and by the time the plane was ready, Margaret would already be standing at the edge of a heartbreak she could never have imagined. The airport had seemed magical when they first arrived. Margaret had never seen such shining floors, such tall ceilings, such endless rows of people moving like water through glass corridors. She had looked around with wide eyes, half amazed, half nervous, and Daniel had laughed softly at her wonder. "Haha, Mama, you look like a little girl seeing the world for the first time." She had smiled and touched his arm. "Maybe I am." Olivia had walked beside them in her neat coat, her perfume floating in the air like something expensive and distant. She kept one hand lightly on Margaret's arm, smiling with practiced sweetness. "Mom, Wait here for a moment, she said. Immigration is very strict. We'll go ahead, finish the paperwork, and come right back for you. Margaret nodded obediently. Of course, dear. Daniel kissed her forehead. Don't worry, Mama. We'll be right back. You know how these things are. She smiled through her tears. I'll wait. They led her to a row of metal chairs near a quiet corner by the windows. Margaret sat down carefully, smoothing her sari over her knees. She watched them walk away, Daniel carrying the documents, Olivia turning once to wave. Margaret waved back, her heart swelling with gratitude. She thought, this is it. My son remembered me. My son kept his promise. Minutes passed, then an hour, then another. The airport lights grew softer as afternoon slid into evening. Margaret checked the doorway every few seconds, her hopeful eyes searching every face. Each time someone in a dark jacket passed by, her heart jumped. Daniel, she whispered once. Olivia? No answer. She tried calling Daniel, but the phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. She smiled nervously at herself. Maybe they're busy, she murmured. Maybe the line is long. But the silence around her began to feel heavy, almost cruel. Her stomach tightened. She remembered how Daniel used to run to her when he scraped his knee, crying, Mama, it hurts. She remembered holding him through fevers, through nightmares, through every small fear of childhood. She had never once left him waiting. At last her phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. Her whole body relaxed with relief. Daniel, where are you? I've been waiting. His voice came through flat and distant, stripped of warmth. Mom, we're already on the plane. Margaret blinked. What? No, you must be joking. Haha, very funny. Come back. I'm still here. There was a pause, and in that pause something inside her began to crack. Then Daniel spoke again, quieter this time, as if reading from a script he hated. I'm sorry. Olivia doesn't want to live with you. We can't take care of you anymore. Goodbye. Margaret's breath caught. Daniel, what are you saying? But the line had already gone dead. She stared at the phone as if it had betrayed her. Her lips trembled. No. Her voice rose, thin and broken. Daniel? Daniel. People turned to look. A woman nearby frowned. A child stared. Margaret stood up too quickly, nearly dropping her suitcase. My son, she cried, her voice cracking into pieces. My son left me here? And then the truth hit her with such force that her knees nearly gave out. She had not been delayed. She had been abandoned. Margaret sank back into the chair as if all the strength had been pulled from her bones. Her suitcase slipped from her hand and landed with a dull thud on the floor. She stared at the screen of her phone, hoping the words would change, hoping Daniel would call back laughing, saying it was all a mistake. But the silence remained, cold and merciless. No, she whispered. Daniel, please. The tears came first slowly, then all at once. They rolled down her cheeks and into the lines of her face, carrying years of love, sacrifice, and trust with them. She covered her mouth, but the sobs escaped anyway. I sold my jewelry for your education, she cried into the empty air. I skipped meals so you could eat. I wore the same shoes until the soles broke. How could you do this to me? How could you? Her voice echoed through the terminal, raw and heartbreaking. Travelers slowed. Some looked away in discomfort. Others stared with pity. Margaret did not care. She was no longer in the airport. She was back in every cold morning she had worked through, every night she had gone hungry, every prayer she had whispered over Daniel's sleeping face. Hours passed. The sky outside the glass walls darkened into night. The airport became quieter, but Margaret remained in the same chair, clutching her suitcase like a lifeline. Every time the automatic doors opened, she lifted her head with a flicker of hope. Maybe Daniel had come back. Maybe Olivia had changed her mind. Maybe this nightmare would end. But each time, it was only strangers. At last, an elderly janitor approached her. He had kind eyes and a tired face, and his name tag read Hassan. He stopped a few feet away, unsure. Ma'am, are you all right? Margaret tried to answer, but only a broken sound came out. She shook her head and wept harder. Hassan looked around. then quietly fetched a paper cup of hot tea from a nearby stall with his own money. He returned and held it out gently. "Please, drink something." Her hands trembled so badly she nearly spilled it. "Thank you," she whispered. He sat beside her without asking questions. The silence between them was soft, respectful. After a long while, Margaret said, "My son used to hold my hand like this when he was little. He was afraid of getting lost." She gave a weak, shattered laugh. "Haha, funny, isn't it? Today I'm the one who got lost." Hassan's eyes filled with tears. He looked away quickly, embarrassed by his own emotion. Margaret stared into the tea. "He promised me a home." Hassan swallowed hard. "Then he was foolish to let you sit here alone." That simple kindness nearly broke her all over again. When the airport staff finally noticed her still waiting long after midnight, they helped her contact a local shelter. Margaret moved like a ghost, numb and exhausted, her heart too tired to fight anymore. She kept thinking of Daniel's voice, so cold, so final. She kept hearing Olivia's sweet lies. She kept asking herself where she had gone wrong. And somewhere in the dark, her phone remained silent. But by morning, the world would hear her story, and the shame Daniel had hidden would begin to crawl into the light. The shelter was small, warm, and smelled faintly of soup and clean blankets. Margaret sat on a narrow bed and stared at the wall while volunteers spoke softly around her. One woman brushed Margaret's hair back and said, "You're safe here now." Another brought her bread and tea. A little girl peered around the doorway and whispered, "Ah, she looks like my grandma." Margaret almost smiled at that. For the first time since the airport, she slept a little. Not peacefully, not without tears, but enough to stop the shaking in her hands. In the morning, one of the volunteers showed her a video that had been posted online by a traveler who had seen her crying in the terminal. In the clip, Margaret's voice trembled as she said, "I only wanted to spend my last years hearing my son's voice." The video spread like fire. People across the internet cried watching her sit alone with her suitcase, waiting for a family that never returned. Comments poured in from strangers who called her brave, heartbroken, and beautiful. Some offered money. Some offered prayers. Some simply wrote, "I'm weeping." The story reached Daniel's office first, then his friends, then his neighbors. People who had once admired him now looked at him with disgust. His phone rang constantly, but he stopped answering. Olivia, however, remained cold. "Ignore it," she told him. People forget. But they did not forget. Everywhere Daniel went, he felt the weight of shame. At work, conversations stopped when he entered the room. At the grocery store, someone muttered, "That's the man who left his mother." He began to see Margaret's face everywhere, in the reflection of windows, in the eyes of old women on buses, in the silence of his own apartment. Meanwhile, Margaret slowly began to heal in the shelter. She helped fold blankets. She told stories to children. She learned the names of the volunteers. The little girl who had called her grandma came back every afternoon to sit beside her. "Ah, Grandma Margaret," she would say, climbing into her lap, "tell us about when you were young." And Margaret would laugh through her tears and tell them about mango trees, monsoon rains, and the first time Daniel had learned to ride a bicycle. For the first time in years, her laughter returned, soft but real. Still, at night, when the shelter grew quiet, she would stare at the ceiling and wonder if Daniel ever thought of her. Did he remember the nights she stayed awake beside his fevered bed? Did he remember the way she sang to him when he was afraid? And one rainy evening, as thunder rolled outside and the children were already asleep, the shelter door opened. A man stood there soaked from the rain, his face pale, his shoulders shaking. It was Daniel. And the sight of him would either destroy what was left of Margaret's heart or finally set it free. Daniel looked nothing like the confident son who had once walked beside Margaret at the airport. He stood in the doorway with rain dripping from his hair, his eyes red, his hands trembling as if he were afraid the floor might swallow him. For a moment he could not speak. He only stared at his mother sitting under the dim shelter light, smaller than he remembered, yet somehow stronger than he had ever been. Margaret looked up slowly. Her face did not harden. It did not soften either. It simply held the quiet pain of a woman who had already cried too much. "Mom," Daniel whispered. His voice broke on the word. "Please, please forgive me." The room was silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. He stepped forward, then stopped, as if he did not deserve to come closer. "I was weak," he said, tears spilling down his face. "Olivia kept saying you would be a burden, that we needed a fresh start, that life in America would be easier without, he choked. I let her poison my mind. I let her turn me into someone I hate." Margaret's eyes filled, but she did not cry yet. "You left me at an airport," she said softly. "You let me wait like a fool." Daniel dropped to his knees. I know. I hear your voice every night. I see your face every time I close my eyes. I thought I could live with it, but I can't. I can't, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He bent forward until his forehead touched the floor. "Please, Mama. Please." The little girl from the shelter peeked from behind a curtain, her eyes wide. "Ah," she whispered, clutching a blanket to her chest. Margaret looked at her son for a long time. She remembered the boy who used to fall asleep on her lap. She remembered the teenager who had once promised to care for her. She remembered the man who had chosen comfort over love. Her heart ached so deeply it felt like a wound that would never close. Then, very slowly, she stood. Daniel lifted his head, hope and terror mixing on his face. Margaret touched his cheek with one trembling hand. "I forgave you the moment I understood what kind of son you had become," she said. "Not because you deserved it. Because I was tired of carrying your cruelty inside my heart." He began to sob harder, shaking with the force of it. "But forgiveness," she continued, her voice steady now, "does not mean forgetting. And it does not mean I will let you hurt me again." Daniel nodded frantically. I understand. Margaret looked toward the children gathered in the shelter, their faces bright with curiosity and kindness. Then she looked back at her son. "I spent my whole life giving you everything," she said. "Now I want something small for myself. Peace." Daniel covered his face and wept. Margaret did not turn away from him in anger. She turned away in healing. She walked slowly toward the children, who opened their arms to her with the easy love adults so often forget. The little girl smiled up at her and said, "Grandma Margaret, sit with us." Margaret sat down among them, and for the first time in a very long time, her heart felt light enough to breathe. Behind her, Daniel remained on his knees, crying into the rain-soaked silence, finally understanding too late what he had thrown away. Some hearts are broken by strangers, but the deepest wounds are often made by the hands we once held closest.